parties. Now, since we posted these curves, we're getting contacted by several groups. Specifically in the Tulare Lake Basin, we've been contacted by the Kings River Water Association and also the Kaweah River and St. Johns River Association. Both of these entities serve as a water master for the watersheds. And in their letters, they express that the curtailment is not necessary and because they are regulating the supply of water. They've done that for many years, and the regulation is done consistent with either a settlement agreement amongst all the parties or by a court ruling or settlement of litigation. So we are looking at their stance, and we're also asking to get some information from the other watersheds in the Tulare Lake Basin, because I believe those are also water mastered. They feel, in fact, Kings River Association feels it would be unreasonable to curtail their post-14 right to Pine Flat Reservoir, because that provides them the ability to make releases sufficient to get it to some of their water users, whereas natural flow would not reach them in sometimes. And also that they provide some water for fishery in that system. We just had a conference call with the San Joaquin River Group because they saw the curtailments, potential for curtailments for the tributaries. That river group represents the major water right holders, the senior-most water right holders in the upper watersheds with the larger reservoirs. For example, Don Pedro, Exchequer Dam, and then the Malones, they have water rights to Malones Dam that the Bureau operates. These groups are looking at the necessity for the curtailment, and they asked to review some of the diversion data that we had, so we have provided that information to them. We will be having a conference call with West Stanislaus Irrigation District also. So stakeholders are contacting us. I invite anybody that wants to meet, that we are absolutely willing to meet with people to discuss our findings and their opinions of those.
Good, good, great.
That's my presentation, unless you have any questions.
I have some questions. On the tributaries group in particular, what suggestions do you have for outreach so that the folks out there that are receiving water, from these major entities aren't confused? And I'm talking about, a farmer that they've already received an allocation, and now they catch wind about curtailments, and they go on the website and they take it to mean that something will happen that's different from what they've already been told. And the second part of the question is, how do you evaluate for pre and post 1914 water rights that some of these irrigation districts have? Because they have a combination.
Right. For the second question, dealing with the pre-14 and post-14, most of the large entities have a suite of rights that are duplicative in some cases or different for different uses, power and consumptive use under several priorities. We are cutting from the top, and they're if you look at those tributaries, we're not at pre-14 water right levels yet, so we're not affecting any claims they have for pre-14 water rights on the curtailment process at this time. But as far as priorities, their rights would stack on there. One of the issues that we did have and we are seeing is that for storage rights, it might be the same water, and we're trying to separate that out on our demand curves. In regards to your first question, someone says, hey, I have a contract with an entity. On our website, we identify that The curtailment does not affect a district's ability to use water that it has previously collected to storage.
Right.
You know, a district may be curtailed for collecting water or directly diverting under its water right, but if it still has water that it has previously collected to storage, it would have the opportunity to provide that water. And our curtailment does not affect a contract between a water user and a district selling water under a water right. We also have identified on our curtailment curves some notes that for hydroelectric power operations, the curtailment of water rights, there would be an exemption for power generation by direct diversion that is returned back to the source, because that water is,
Still there.
it's not being consumed, it's being generated and put back to the stream. So there would be an exemption on our notes, it's on every one of the web pages, that they could continue to operate because of the non-consumptive use of the water. In regards to health and safety, there is also on the notes an exemption for critical water needs for health and safety. If they have no other water supply, they can contact the board, and they would have an opportunity to continue use of health and safety needs.
Barbara Evoy, Division of Water Rights. As John said, we have a lot of activities going on, but certainly if there are opportunities perhaps to join with the Farm Bureau and perhaps the Bureau itself, Bureau of Reclamation, to explain the actions we're undertaking. I know they have a lot of meetings going on now on their contracts themselves and their allocations. So perhaps we could join in on some of those. So certainly if you have ideas for forums or particular outreach opportunities, we'd be happy to look at those.
Yes, thank you.
No, that's great. Do we have FAQs up on this part of the site too? That might be a useful thing to have, sort of the common questions people might have.
Yeah, and I don't know, I just looked at it, I'm not sure if it
We
includes,
do.
if it
We-
includes the storage issue. It would be good to include that if it doesn't
Yeah,
have
it
it in there.
doesn't, it does not. The FAQs that are up there were posted about a month and a half
So
ago,
they're
and we
all-
can amend the FAQ. It's on the each specific tributary link that John showed you a little while ago. It's listed there as a note, but we can amend the FAQ.
We also have a specific curtailment telephone line that we have activated, and so we're gathering the most frequently asked questions from that telephone line in order to translate those into targeted frequently asked questions as we start to hear themes of concerns.
Thank you. I'm actually going to be speaking at a conference next week, and they asked to hear about this, so maybe if we can connect later. I think I'll steal some of your PowerPoint.
Yeah,
Very good, thank you.
I can probably use some talking points for the drought task force in Visalia, because it would update from the last drought task force I did. I won't get to do a PowerPoint, but probably it's a good forum and venue to dispel either myths or concerns or whatever. So I could use that as
We'll
well.
certainly work on putting something together for all the board members to use.
That would be
Yep,
great.
I'll need it for a North Coast panel I'm being on.
Don't sound exactly alike, though. Put your own little spin on it.
Right, no, but, you know, of course, the North
Yeah.
Coast isn't exactly like Tulare Basin, so.
Right,
Thanks.
right. Do you think, John, is there a, this may be implicit in everything you said, but is it, given that you have on some of the tributaries or rivers, you don't have a massive number of you have some really large water right holders and small ones, and people do have this mix of junior and senior. The fact that they have a mix of junior and senior, and even particularly when there's a water master, but even without, are people coming to you and saying, we can solve this ourselves? Because generally when you're trying to do the curtailments, you're doing it to junior water rights holders in favor of the seniors. And if the seniors come in and say, we'd rather do it this way, does that make your job easier?
That is why we're looking specifically at the Tulare Lake Basin, because they account for the junior water right holders in their analysis. And if they feel that they are protective of the senior water rights, which is why we are doing this,
Right.
there may be no necessity for us to do an additional curtailment. And again, I agree with you on, that's why we're meeting with the San Joaquin River Group.
Great.
They are the major senior water right holders in the upper parts of the watershed. Upstream of them are many different types of water rights, and some of them are very small, some are large, and we would appreciate their feedback on the necessity of curtailing up there. And then we are also looking at downstream issues dealing with using water that is being released from storage for these different purposes that Les and Amanda have talked about.
That's interesting. So it's an opportunity for a community to come together,
Yes.
frankly, in a crisis. That's good.
This is reminding me of the discussions between Fish and Wildlife and some of the upper watershed communities about stored water, so that the riparian users could bypass at a time when the water could be better used for fisheries. What's the status of that? I know Chuck Bonham was working on it. Does anybody know?
Are you,
Perhaps you're referring to on the Sacramento River, that there's been discussion that was with some of the settlement contractors.
No, this is
No.
different. This was on riparian users, small rights to be able to hold water for public health, store it.
I think Amanda can address it.
Sure. So I think you're talking
Yeah.
about the small domestic use registration program in the
Oh, right.
North Coast. And so that's where the Division of Water Rights
Tanks
has
issue.
registration programs for a variety of uses. One of them is small domestic, so use in houses and campgrounds and that sort of thing. And we worked collaboratively with Department of Fish and Wildlife, who sets conditions on individual registrations. And they came up with a set of general conditions up in that North Coast area where there's a lot of homeowners that might be using the water. Many of them are existing riparians, and they divert when they need the water. So they divert all summer long. And from Fish and Wildlife's perspective, if they could move them from summer diversions to wintertime diversion when flow are higher, that would be beneficial to fisheries. To help enable that, they created generalized conditions, and we set those within our registration program. So if a party self-certifies that they meet those conditions, they can move from riparian to a registration.
And this would be beyond the period of the drought?
I-
Or just drought?
Entering into the registration program under the drought conditions, the generalized conditions, is during the drought period. But once they're in the registration program, then they stay in there.
Okay, good.
So, and CDFW always has the ability to recondition registrations at any time.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That is a great program. Well, thank you.
I just want to jump in and thank all of you. I know you've been working round the clock, and sometimes I feel like I'm a pest, but you guys have been just terrific in responding to specific questions and less detailed memos. So thank you so much for all the support. And I really think that we've come a long way than where we were a couple of months ago.
Good. Thank you. Well, there you go. That could have been a total downer of an update, and it was like a lot of progress there. Thank you. I was girding myself even, so that's great. All right. Item number 8.
Yes, the second informational item we have today, and we have Kevin Graves here to talk about his update on actions to improve administration of the underground storage tank cleanup fund and the underground storage tank cleanup programs. This is a follow-up from a 2009 resolution. We also have Lisa Babcock and Chris Kerrigan, so I guess we're going to hear from all parts of the underground storage tank program.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Kevin Graves from the Division of Water Quality, presenting an update on the UST cleanup program. And Lisa Babcock from the fund and Chris Kerrigan from the Office of Enforcement will be following me. There it is. Thank you. In the UST program, we look at closures, case closures, as a primary metric on how the program is running, and we are up at a high right now. And so case closures are doing well. The agencies, in comparison to past years there, we're running ahead of the pace that we have in the past. Generally running about 1,000 cases. Today, we're almost at 1,300. So this is a bright spot for the program. As well, the low threat closure policy implementation plan was adopted by the board in 2011, I think. And both of the milestones that were needing to be accomplished by the regulatory agencies were accomplished on schedule. So they reviewed all of their cases and performed completed checklists on GeoTracker by the August 17th date, and then they completed all of the path to closure plans by December 31st. So the agencies are on board in implementing the policy, and that's reflected not only in these reviews but also in the status of the cases. Now, the path to closure plans are interesting in that they are a projection of the events that the agencies expect to happen on each case. We have currently about 1,500 cases that are eligible for closure now that are working their way through the closure process. And the rest of the cases all got a path to closure plan completed. And you can see on the screen that we have projected when those case closures would happen for each of the cases. And we use the 1/1/20 date as a milestone to see how many cases would be left. Path to closure plans project about 584. We think that may be optimistic, though. A couple slides to come, I'll give two alternative rationales for why it may take a little longer, and the tail will be longer on the curve. This is an analysis we did of the age of cases and whether or not it was in a particular status. So you can see that on the first line of green, it's eligible for closure and how long it has been open. Recent cases that just came into the system, there were 51 there, less than 5 years eligible for closure, and then 25 plus years at the other end. Those in the green we think are very easy to close because they're already eligible for closure, or they're in verification monitoring, and we look forward to those working their way through the closure process in the next couple years. In the yellow, those are still in remediation, or they're recently come into the system in site assessment, and there's a couple thousand there that are going to be tougher because we've got to actually get the site work done. And in the red, we're not very optimistic that those are actually going to work through the closure process in the next 5 or 6 years because they have not moved in 10, 15, 20 years through the process, and they're still in site assessment.
And are those focused, or are those concentrated largely in Region 4, LA?
I think they're spread across the state. LA
Really?
certainly has their fair share, a lot of them. But
Region 5, I guess, Central Valley has.
all of the
5.
regions will
Have some.
will have their share of these, yes.
I hesitate to ask this question. It may be on the next slide. But what do we do with the difficult ones? I mean, are we authorized to go ahead and run the cleanup without an RP and pay ourselves?
We do have programs called the EAR account, and there's a limited amount of funding to do that. It's very staff intensive.
I would think.
These have been languishing, as we might say it, or stuck cases, a term of art, because they're difficult to work on. They oftentimes don't have a viable RP. And by viable, I mean an RP that is willing to work, has money. We have a slide later on in the presentation about our abandoned tanks program, where we have actually started to contact responsible parties on these stuck cases and really try to find out what the issues are. And that's one of the reasons we think they're going to go so slow, is because we've actually started breaking down into different groups, sites that have an RP that recognizes they have a problem, sites that have an RP that doesn't accept that they have a problem. It's tough to work with an RP if they don't accept that they have a problem, or if the problem at their site doesn't belong to them, it belongs to someone else.
Are you saying we're going to need tank therapists too?
We are going to need tank therapists, yes. That's for sure. This next slide shows that the elapsed time that a case has been in the eligible for closure status. Now, we would like to, green is good, red is bad. And we have seen through the last several years that we put a site ineligible for closure when it is recognized that it meets the case closure criteria in the policy. Meets the policy criteria, and then we write a letter to the agents, to the RPs saying, destroy your wells, remove the equipment from the site. And what we're finding is that getting the paperwork out and getting the RPs to actually destroy their wells is taking much longer than we would expect. That the RPs are looking at that eligible for closure letter as the I'm all done. And we're now having to actually view some of these cases that have been in the status for greater than 18 months. Now it is stuck in the case closure process. And so additional staff time is going to have to be spent to reach out to the responsible party, say, no, you're not done. You actually have to destroy your wells and do these tasks in order to get your closure letter. We hadn't anticipated that. We had anticipated that that would go very quickly.
Right, people would want to get out.
They would want to get out, yes, and do the work. This slide shows closure requests that have been received since the policy. And you can see that green is good, red is bad. Most of the closure requests are actually being approved by the regulatory agencies. It's not as if agencies are dragging their heels, they're not going along with closure, that the majority are actually being closed and recognized by the agency they're being closed under the policy. So that's really good. I don't see a lot of pushback on acceptance of the policy. The yellow are the ones that are denied, and so state board staff, either the fund or DWQ, are reviewing all of those cases to see whether or not we agree with the agency. And when we don't agree with the agency, we're proceeding to closure on our own. Since following along that last slide, we do reviews for a number of different reasons: 5-year reviews, case closure reviews. We're reviewing cases that we're the lead agency on. And we've done over 1,200 reviews in the last, year or something like that, since a year and a half. So the state board staff are really moving quickly and working hard to review these cases. Not only have we noticed 218, as you can see there, cases for closure, 150 have actually had the closure order signed. But in addition to that, cases were closed by the agencies after our review. We'll review the case, talk to the agencies, and over 400 were closed by the agency after those discussions. So this collaboration between the state board reviewing and the agencies is really working effectively to move these cases through the system and identify what the impediments are that need to be worked. One of those types of reviews that we're doing is cases that were transferred to the water boards from LOPs that didn't become certified. There are 382 throughout the state that were transferred and needed to have some kind of triage. We didn't know whether they were actually cases, was it data cleanup? And so our staff in DWQ, along with our contractors through US EPA, have gone through all of those cases and put them into various bins. Many of them we were able to just clean up the database. Some of them were transferred to regions when we'd recognize that they had treatment systems or needed more work, and the regions took those over. But 153 we're proceeding to closure on, and you can see that we're doing the review of those document preps, and we have notices posted on 41, so we're moving through those. The needing additional site investigation, 111, our original plan was to proceed in DWQ with going ahead and writing letters to get additional work done on those. We've since rethought that based upon our experience with the abandoned tanks program, and the next few slides I'll discuss that. We think that those are going to be very difficult to actually get work done, because for the most part they're over 10 years, sometimes 15 years old since the tank pull. There's been no correspondence since that time, and so we're going to have to re-engage with the responsible party to try to get more work done. And our time right now we think is better spent moving the closure paperwork through, cleaning out the closures, finishing that, and then using the experience that we will have gained in abandoned tanks to better be much more efficient in how we engage with those responsible parties. And speaking of abandoned tanks, here you have a tank that's in the ground, it's coming out. That's what we mean, is that abandoned tanks is where there's a tank in the ground, not regulated, not being used, and yet it needs to come out because you can only have a tank in the ground for a year without using it. So this here, you can see the other other picture there is a finished building. That's Frank's Restaurant. And so for those of you that were following the Frank story,
It's in Hawthorne, I believe.
Bellflower, as I recall.
Bellflower, that's right.
And so this was a brownfield case with had a tank, and they wanted to do redevelopment. They couldn't, and so we worked with them to get funding and to actually help them do the work, get the site cleaned up, and now they have a redeveloped success story here. We'd like to have more of these success stories too. This shows statewide the 337 abandoned tanks that are in California. They're somewhat evenly distributed, but there are concentrations around. One particular inset is on Fresno, and the other is down in Los Angeles. As you mentioned earlier, LA does have more than its fair share of these. Although there's a lot of green dots down there which are into compliance. The LA County District Attorney has taken an interest in this project and has worked closely with us and has actually taken over those cases away from us having to do. You'll notice at the bottom bullet is 44 non-compliant sites are being handled by local agencies. A lot of those are with LA District Attorney, where they call the RP into the District Attorney's office to have a conversation with them, and it seems to be very effective in stimulating more work. Now, we sent out 170 notice of noncompliance. That's our workload on this. And the next slide shows how successful we've been in that. We've gotten 90 responses back from the 170, which is about half. And owners willing to comply is the first bullet under there of 42, about 25%. So we've gotten contact from the agent, from the RP, and they agree that yes, I have a problem, and yes, I have money, and yes, I will move forward to either get the tank out of the ground or get it permitted. And that's a great success in that because of our work, we have got 25% of these cases back into compliance. They're on the track to. The problem is those 75% that either have not contacted us or they have contacted us and says they don't have any money, they dispute whether the tank is theirs. Those are going to require a lot more intensive staff work. And we think that there are probably thousands of these types of sites that are going to be the last of our case closures when there's no data, and we have to engage with the RP and sometimes even convince them that there's an issue that on the site. This slide is from our AB 2222 report that was published and sent to the legislature several years ago. This was put together by the GAMMA program, and this shows the contaminants that are in municipal wells over the past 10 years that have had two or more detections. So this is an illustration of the types of contaminants in our public water supply. And you'll note that benzene and MTBE have very few, 5 and 6 detections, regular detections in public supply wells. And yet nitrates, it's 451, and then the PCE and TCE, the solvents, are much more problematic in municipal wells. That sort of shows that the UST program, even though we're working diligently and we're doing all these cleanups, it isn't going to have a large impact on water supply. And so if we're thinking about drought relief, if we're thinking about, you know, how we're going to increase the amount of water in California, UST program probably isn't going to be able to contribute a lot to that. Whereas if we were to clean up nitrates and solvents, we would see much more of a water supply increase. And this just summarizes some of the points I made, that we're working hard, the agencies are on board. Closure rates are probably going to slow down in some number of years ahead because they're the tough RP cases. Few municipal wells impacted, and are really in the next few years how we transition from this focus on USTs to a focus on other groundwater contaminants. It's going to be a challenge that we have in the program. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? It's really excellent work and excellent
Thank you.
briefings, and this is even better.
Got the clicker?
Yeah.
So, oh, do I need to click? Getting that queued up.
Okay. Excuse me. So, good morning, I'm Lisa Babcock, the UST Cleanup Fund Manager. Excuse me. Something I wanted to follow up on something that Kevin was saying in the discussion early on, which is that, about half, we'll talk about it, I'll talk about it in a minute too, but about half of the open cases that are separate from those that are eligible for closure are in the cleanup fund, and about half of those are in site assessment. So funding may or may not be the main issue. So we'll need to be looking into the reasons for those cases being in site assessment. There is some correlation with the oversight agency, though. So I'm going to cover a number of topics: an overview of the fund's health, the fund universe, estimates of unreimbursed costs, and administrative improvements. How did you do that? I've shown this slide a number of times. For context again, petroleum storage fees are paid by operating gas stations to the Board of Equalization. Revenues collected each fiscal year since 1990 are shown in the blue line. Shows major fluctuations kind of regardless of the fee rate, which is shown on the bottom in green. The 2010 fee bump of 2 cents dropped to 1.4 cents on January 1st. So far, we have not seen the expected drop in revenues, but we will. There's always a lag time. The fund itself has some cash reserves for a couple of reasons. As Kevin told you, many regulatory cases have been closing, sorry, and therefore claims have been closing. Claimants have not been using the entire amount set aside for them in their annual site budgets. Also, revenues have exceeded our projections for the last year or so. I guess I'll have to do that.
I don't have cooties. I'll drink my
I
water.
promised. Sorry. Well, I don't know if that's going to help. But as you can see, the current fund sunset still is in less than 2 years, January 1st of 2016. So we will see what happens in the next several months. Wow. Okay. So this slide I've shown you before. The main focus on this is to point out that only 28% of all of the 43,000 UST regulatory cases are eligible for the fund. The blue shows the closed cases, red shows those that are eligible for closure, and green shows the open cases doing investigation or remediation work. This slide is the bar on the right is the same as the previous slide, but this is, I'm sorry, this is crazy. But the left bar is new. It's showing that the fund has received about almost 20,000 applications over the life of the fund in the last 23 years. From the bottom up, over 9,000 have been reimbursed and the claim closed. This is up for about 8,300 closed claims less than a year ago. So we've had many claims close. There are about 2,400 that are currently being reimbursed as under active claims. This is down from about 3,200 when I started a couple of years ago. There are 4,500 waiting on the priority list to be funded, and about 3,700 have been found eligible, not eligible. That's the gray on the top. And about 165 applications are under review at any one time because we do continue to get applications to be into the fund. I don't know if I can talk and do that at the same time. I'll work on that. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so the bar on the right is only the eligible claims, and this is showing the the regulatory case status. Over 12,000 cases are closed. Less than 1,000 are currently eligible for case closure. leaving about 3,500 cases open. Okay. Oops, let's go back. So of the cases that are on the priority list still waiting to be funded, we have about 4,500. We are always continuously activating priority A's and B claims, and for the first time in several years, I think since 2008, 2009, we're activating the remaining priority C claims because of the revenues that we have available to us. So that'll drop the number to about 4,400 sitting on the priority list. It takes, several months for those activations to occur. So this is on a completely different scale because it only totals to about 2,400 claims, but it shows the claims, the priority of the claims that are currently being funded. So what we've done is we have reimbursed to date about $3.4 billion in the last 22 years or so, but we've also estimated the unreimbursed costs, and we've broken that down. It's about $3.3 billion is our, very crude estimate. And we've broken that down into 3 different ways. So about a third we estimate is for currently open cases, 2/3 for closed cases. About a sixth is for active claims, and 5/6 is for priority list claims. And since the Ds are the priority list claims, that's about 5/6 of the estimated unreimbursed cost. So over the last few years, we've been improving our administrative processes, and we're refining plus doing a few more initiatives. So for fiscal controls, we paid old costs of active claims a couple of years ago. Now we are only reimbursing work that's currently being done or the old costs of claims as they're being activated from the priority list. Those tend to be, one reimbursement, very long, big package comes in, so they're kind of one and done. Let's see. As you know, the site budgets are set up annually to inform claimants of dollars available to reimburse eligible costs. We're now providing those site budgets about 8 to 9 months before the beginning of the fiscal year to help with planning with the responsible parties and the regulators in terms of what work that will be done. Budget change requests are now being processed continuously. We updated the cost guidelines for the hourly unit rates effective January 1st, adjusted for the CPI. They hadn't been updated for most of them for about 10 years or so. We also increased the site budgets for this coming fiscal year, 14-15, by about 10% to reflect the updated unit cost in the cost guidelines, as well as the fact that we have more money available to us for a while. We imposed administrative deadlines for submitting invoices to be September 30th of each year, ending June 30th. When we do our payments, or processing for payments, the on-time invoices within the site budget are paid first. The on-time invoices over budget are paid second, and late packages are submitted third. So there's a lot of motivation for people to be more timely in submitting their reimbursement requests. Payment processing times, the statute requires 60 days to pay. In the past, the state has paid much later. For timely submittals, currently the fund complete date average time is about 52 days, and the state pay date ends up at day 74, day 75. For the late submittals, the ones that are submitted after September 30th, we are currently working on those that were submitted in December. And those, once we touch them, will usually take about a similar amount of time to pay. We have a web page, which is basically a list of how to get paid faster. And, you know, do not commit fraud. Submit complete RR packages. Submit them timely. And our new initiative is to submit using Fund GTO. It's supposed to sound fast, okay? So it's the Fund GeoTracker online. We're dating ourselves, is that what you said? Yes, I guess. So you may have seen a number of fund updates over the last few weeks about Fund GTO. It uses GeoTracker. It's the same portal that responsible parties use to upload regulatory compliance reports. So responsible parties are very familiar with how to do this, and it's a very simple process. Claimants upload documents required by the fund for reimbursement of eligible corrective action costs, such as supporting documents, appeals, invoices. The CUF invoicing process is, in particular, is putting the invoice information on a spreadsheet and uploading that spreadsheet. GeoTracker generates an invoice based on the data and having done data checking for errors and formatting, and sends warnings about some things, like if something's over the cost guidelines, just things explaining to people, to the claimants, areas that we might be looking. Not that they're rejected, just heads up. The claimant signs and uploads the generated invoice as well as the original documents as PDFs. So the claimant is able to see the documents. There's no question about whether we got it. All those follow-up emails for many, many documents that we receive. Did you get it? Are you sure? You know, everybody can see at the same time what's been uploaded and basically its status. So people should be expecting faster reimbursements, reduced error rates, likely reduced fraud rate to some degrees, and up-to-date payment status reports. So in terms of I'm behind on my slides. So in terms of the timeline, we are now in full production for uploading supporting documents. That went into effect a week ago, and we are receiving lots of documents now. We're about to start beta testing for the uploading of the invoices themselves, which is, we have about 20 beta testers who are interested in doing this. So depending on how the beta testing goes, we're hoping to be full production in June or July on the Fund GeoTracker. And we have user guides on the web page. We'll be doing WebExes. And if you have any questions?
Good morning, honorable board members. Oh, go ahead.
First of all, Lisa, that was great. Thank you. And the improvements that you and your staff have made in the processing time is incredible. Great. Really, really good job. I do have a question with respect to that. I know that one of the challenges we've had previously is the, shall we say, the late submittals and the piling of submittals of these claims. And we've tried to work with the claimants to do, for them to do things on a more periodic, more timely basis. Has that resulted in improvement? I see from your slide that our deadlines or our timing for processing the on-time payments are great, but what percentage are actually coming in on time versus how much are still bunched up in late submissions?
A lot are late.
Yeah, okay.
A lot are late. But I think, obviously, what we did was we started parsing the timelines, right? When we bunched everything together and did an average of every submittal that was what came in, our deadlines were really, really long. So, I think there's some, numbers that shifted mostly because we're saying, well, for the ones that are on time, that we can touch right away, because it's about, how quickly can we touch it? Can we touch it, and how quickly do we process? No matter what we do, we process in about the same amount of time within, the 54-day average. So what we did was just basically we're giving the shorter payment times to the people who do submit timely, and the ones that submit late get to just kind of wait behind everybody else. But
And
no,
hopefully they'll learn.
right. So it's many more than 50% are still submit late. But we'll see. Each year it's a little bit better, so we'll see how it goes.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, and we had some discussions because our friends in the North Coast had some questions, but we were focusing more on maybe the timeline on the budget change requests. And so could you briefly explain how that compares to what Board Member Dodig was talking about on overall, timely submittal? Obviously things change in the field, and there's been mixed success in being responsive to that, but how much of that is a lack of planning, like Tam alluded to, versus our response time being in that same zone when things come up with the budget change requests? So are they part of that late submittal, or is that just a process that we're maybe using the GeoTracker tool to maybe be more responsive in dealing with?
The budget piece that we've been talking with you about Region 1 isn't really related to the payment processing at all. But something that Region 1 has brought up is, and others have brought up, is the fact that the fiscal year drops in the middle of most people's field season. So the request was to coordinate with us better in terms of making sure that whatever their plan is, they have the funding for both the current fiscal year and next fiscal year known ahead of time so they can actually do the work. And since we have, we provided people their budgets back in October for this coming July 1st, we're hoping that those kinds of things will work out. But we're going to be meeting directly with the Region 1 folks who we understand have gotten the message loud and clear and are prioritizing cases and want to come and talk to us about how to get those moving.
That's good. And I appreciate you point that out, that you now have a systemic approach where you're giving a good 9 months lead time so that they can cross the bridge of the fiscal year, hopefully a lot more seamlessly.
Right. And something I wanted to emphasize that Kevin said is that, we've done maybe 800 case reviews over the last year and a half or so, couple years. And, we find that when we just start a review, we'll tell them when we're an agency that we're about to do a review, and they'll say, we're going to close it. So, I mean, it's highly motivating. I mean, this is just very, things are working well. The communication, the consequences, the challenges, I think are just very dynamic, and they're definitely moving.
Good, I'll remember that. I'll just say, we're thinking about reviewing that situation. I'll use it very judiciously. Okay, thanks.
It's the tool of the moment. Great, thank you. Mr. Kerrigan.
Good morning, honorable board members. I'm Chris Kerrigan. I'm the director of the Office of Enforcement. I have a very brief update for you today about developments with the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Prevention Unit and our activities there. We have 3 cases now that are at the Attorney General's office in various states of prosecution judicially. And while the judicial process can be slow, and we much prefer administrative proceedings if we can get them, we are making good progress on those 3 cases, and we hope to report some results on at least a couple of them to you in the near term. We also have a 4th case where we've developed prima facie evidence for a referral to the Attorney General's office for further investigation of a 4th case involving fraud, waste, and abuse. And we hope that that referral will be completed and prepared for the Attorney General's review within the next 30 days. It's really undergoing final attorney and my own review right now. And then, in the meantime, we continue to investigate and follow up with leads of incidents of further fraud and to develop tools and also techniques for detecting fraud as it is perpetrated against the fund. So working to develop more efficient ways to find fraud and trying to catch up a step or stay one step ahead of the new and various schemes that are being developed. And then also the fund, the prevention unit continues to work with the fund leadership and staff to help develop protocols to detect and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse in the system. And it's been a remarkable achievement of the fund to be able to incorporate those protocols and at the same time speed up the time that they're making payments. So the leadership and fund staff has done an incredible job, really, both taking a closer look at claims for reimbursement and speeding up the time it takes to process a claim. So kudos to the fund staff on their side for being able to do both things at once, and they sometimes conflict. So that's what I wanted to report out to the board members today, and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I actually have a question for Kevin. In observing that when people get a notice, they don't necessarily decide to actually take out the tank or completely close the system. What's going to be your tactic for changing that?
This is an area that we're just moving into. I would guess that each of those subcategories would have a different response. And that's why it's not something that we can just take on a large number of cases all at once. Because if the response to an RP that recognizes there's a problem, recognizes it's their problem, but they really have no money, that's a different type of response than someone who says, well, yeah, I know there's a problem over there, but it's not my problem. Well, you're the property owner. Well, I never operated the tank. You know, there's an education process that we'll have to go through on some, whereas there is, you know, no amount of education can help you get more money. We'll have to go find a funding source to help supplement some of these other things. And how many different categories of response type there are, I don't know yet. That's something that we're going to have to learn.
Thank you very much. Nicely done.
I do appreciate that former board members set up this periodic update for the program. You know, just to stay in touch with it. It's important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Howard, thank you as always for that executive director's report. It's a really handy thing to carry around just to remind us of the full scope of everything that's going on.
Thank you. Well, I encourage you all to read it, page cover to cover.
It is. It's a page turner.
Yes.
It is.
And I'll leave it at that.
Actually, I have two questions on it. Just to prove that I did read it. Actually, the first question is on page 4 and 5, really. It's the item, it's the report on the proposed statewide general permit for mandatory discharges from drinking water system. You know, from my briefings, this is a fairly simple, low-risk activity, and yet we've been working on it since June of last year, and there is no projected date on this. Could you give me an update?
She's the one who's been working on it.
Diana was here too, but not anymore. She's
I think we've had a few, part of it was trying to work with the regional boards. There were 3 or 4 permits that were being prepared simultaneously, so we got ourselves involved at that end of the process. And we started an outreach process, which I guess resulted in things like Region 4 directing its staff not to work with on a statewide permit anymore, and it's just been I do have to say, I agree, it's a very low-risk permit. It's something that should be, 1 or 2 requirements for BMPs, and that should be it. And that seems to always be more difficult than it seems. But I will look into it and get back to you.
I'm well aware of some of the challenges involved, and the reason I'm raising it now is to just express at least my urging to staff. Just like the experience with the low-threat underground storage tank closure policy and the great results from that we just heard an update from staff on, there are these low-threat type of, discharges from drinking water system that I would urge us to move as quickly as possible. This is not an area where we, or even the regional water board staff anyway, should be spending years working on something of such a low threat magnitude. So I just wanted to express that and offer any assistance I can to move this permit along.
Let me just jump in here just real quickly, because I did talk to Vicki, not about this, but also about 3 or 4 other permits that have gotten bogged down by, one thing or another. Sometimes it's the regional board, sometimes it's another agency. And it was her opinion, she's not here, so this is like hearsay, I guess, but it was her opinion that on some of these low threat, using the underground storage tank example, getting a board member involved in the negotiation might be very helpful, because sometimes staff, state board staff and regional board staff, or state board staff and other agency staff, just just simply can't get it can't work on it in a timely way and get it done, and don't anyway, for whatever reason. And so I would say I'm certainly willing to consider offering my time for 1 or possibly 2, but certainly for 1 of these projects. And it sounds like Tam was offering as well, and I bet you could talk some of us into doing more than 1. So let's put that on the list as an experiment to see if we can repeat what was the good work that was done on underground storage tanks.
Okay, thanks.
That's a good idea.
And then my second item, Mr. Howard, is more of a request than a question. Your report, and I appreciate your continuing report on the implementation of SB4, the groundwater monitoring program for oil and gas production areas. I think at some point, hopefully when the budget is approved and we get the positions and funding to start developing some of the criteria and the regional monitoring program as required of us by SB4, my request is, before we jump full steam ahead and have staff, cracking away at developing criteria and regional monitoring program, I would really appreciate a workshop of some kind. The more that I've been exploring this issue, the more tours I go on, the more I realize how little I know in this area. And given the challenges before us of meeting the deadlines in SB4 and the magnitude of developing groundwater criteria as well as the regional monitoring program, I really think we would benefit from, first of all, sort of a workshop to get information on the knowledge that is out there, but also perhaps to seek some experts that we could perhaps tap into later on as part of a stakeholder group or an advisory group of some kind as we proceed down this path.
Yeah, it was our intent to put together an expert group of some kind to provide us with assistance in preparing these regulations. But as soon as the budget gets adopted, we'll schedule something in July, August timeframe to
Right.
as a workshop item.
That's a good idea. Thank you. Any other questions, suggestions? Thank you very much. Okay, we have 2 more items. One is a closed session. The other is the discussion of priorities. How would you like to proceed, Mr. Loffer? I see people.
You know, I would,
For the Millview here.
I would prefer that we can get the Millview item going, just because I know staff want to get back to work on that, and that'll free them up. So I would propose that we convene in closed session, maybe take about 5 minutes before we, 5 or 10 minutes before we convene, so some of the key staff can get downstairs and join us in the closed session room, and then we'll resume open session after that.
All right. Do you have a time estimate on that? I know that's hard to do for people who may want to join us for the priorities discussion.
I do not expect the closed session to be particularly long. In the window of 30 minutes, we will certainly come in here and post it up and notify folks.
Okay. Good. Can we make it, though, in 10 minutes so there's time to get coffee? Okay. Thank you.
So the board will adjourn into closed session for the noticed item, and then reconvene in closed session at, why don't we just say 11:30 for rounding purposes?